Okay. All right, we are live streaming. We're going to put the spotlight on Brother Greenfield. And again, Darren, I just want to thank you for taking the time in a very ridiculously busy time of year for you to join us here this evening. And I know that this is going to be a blessing to many people. So again, thank you. And we'll turn the time over to you.
All right, good evening, friends. I'm very delighted to be with you tonight and to be able to share a few thoughts that hopefully will inspire you to take a look at the things that God has given us to help us through this time that we're living in. We're living in unprecedented times. We're in crisis mode all around the world. I don't think there's hardly a person that's alive today that is not affected by this crisis. And I'm probably one of the least affected, being involved in agriculture. We're one of the essential services, and so much of life is carrying on as normal. But we see the supply chain has been interrupted. And for us here at WEMA, we lost a lot of students due to the COVID-19 situation. They went home and continued studying online, but I lost all my help. So that kind of made it an extra busy time of year for me, but I'm glad to be able to share with you. God has called me to this specific, special, unique ministry. And so even though time is busy, it's a time to minister to people because many are feeling the need to look at agriculture as being the means that God has provided to help us through this rough time where there's a lot of uncertainty. And through agriculture, God designs to teach us to become more dependent on Him and to understand how He works and how we can benefit from the little details that He designed in all of creation that are there to bring about a symphony, a symbiosis, a process where harmony is seen and how we can learn to be part of that. Well, before I begin, let's bow our heads for an additional word of prayer.
And Pastor, if you did want to record this, I don't think you were set up a minute ago to do that, but just to get that prayer on the recording as well, you may have to hit record a second time there. My apologies for that.
Thank you. I just did that. Let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, we are grateful for the technology that in this time where most people are locked down and unable to go to church and meet together, that we're able to meet through the internet, through this Zoom software. And thank you for the opportunity to still be encouraged, to still hear your word, and to still be blessed by the fellowship that is designed by you to build us up and to unite us together in your cause. We ask, Father, that as I share tonight, that your Holy Spirit would lead and would also use me. I'm a faulty vessel and I need your help very much. So please take control, put your words in my mouth, and you know the specific things, the specific needs that everyone has, and may each one tonight take something from what we discuss and what we talk about that will be helpful. Thank you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So the presentation that I have for tonight is called For Such a Time as This. I didn't prepare something specifically for tonight. I took something from a presentation that I've used in the past, and I might have thrown an odd slide in there just to make it a little bit more relevant. But I'm going to see if I can pull up this presentation, and then you'll probably see me disappear into a little box in the corner. And then you'll see the slide. Now, let's see if this is working. Okay, is that working? Can you see the slide there? I've got the first slide up here is a picture, the view that I have every day. I'm very, very blessed. We're up on a hill The farm is located at one of the highest points on campus here at Weimar Institute. And so I'm able to look out above the pine trees there, and I can see South Lake Tahoe and the snow-capped mountains that surround that area. And at the few moments that I have every day to just look and appreciate that view, I'm very, very grateful to be in that atmosphere. And the students love it. We have students from the academy, from the college. We have guests that come to Weimar for different programs. And when they come onto the farm and get a little taste of this God-designed environment for us to dwell in, they just seem to want to dwell there and don't want to leave. And so I want to encourage you as much as possible and as much as you're able to spend time in God's surroundings and get to know him through his creation. It's a special thing. You know, the book of nature, we really don't understand it like we could. We study the Bible, and the Bible reveals a wonderful knowledge of God. But before there was a Bible, there was the book of nature. And Adam and Eve, that was the first book that was given to them to discover what God is like and to discover his character. And, you know, nature is a revelation of the thoughts of God. If you want to understand how God is thinking and how he thinks about us and all his creation, if you study nature, you see such a wonderful, intricate design where every part has a role to play in helping, blessing, and even sustaining other forms of life. And we find ourselves as human beings that we're out of sync with that. You know, as human beings, we seem to more be destroying nature than we are becoming part of that ecological system where we can actually take care of it as God designed when he gave dominion to man. And so I find that working with God and nature, I've learned so much about him and his character. And I'm blown away when I see just the little details. I don't have time to share it all with you tonight, but I'll just give you a little glimpse. As we look at plants and we look at them, you know, with their roots going down into the soil, we see a plant that starts off its life as a miracle, just like all life is a miracle. You know, you take a seed, God gives us one seed. You plant that one seed in the ground and a miracle happens. It's watered, the warmth, it helps it to germinate, and out of that seed, as the seed opens up, comes life. And it puts out roots into the ground, and its head comes up above, and it starts forming leaves and eventually fruit, and feeds us. Well, in that whole system there's so many different forms of life, but I just want to focus on the soil. The soil is an incredible life form in itself. There's so many microbes and bacteria and all kinds of life forms, and they have a vital role to play. In fact, each plant has a different set of microbes and bacteria that they interact with, and they communicate. There's a wonderful communication that goes on. There's fungi, mycorrhizae fungi that attach to roots. There's endo and ecto, some attach on the outside and some on the inside. And then they form this hyphae that connects from one plant to another plant. And they communicate, plants communicate through like a telephone system, just like we talk to each other. And one plant gets attacked by a pest, it sends a signal to the other plants and says, watch out, I'm getting attacked. And the other plants say, thank you. And they start producing phytochemicals and things that put out some kind of a repellent scent that the pests won't want to touch them. We see these wonderful mechanisms there. One of the things that all plants do is they photosynthesize from the sunlight and our carbon dioxide, and they form carbohydrates and sugars, and they use that to grow. But as they grow, they also minister to the life in the soil that's also ministering to them. They exude out these sugars and carbohydrates into the soil, and the bacteria and the microbes feed on that. And they have an exchange system. The plant needs nutrients from the soil, and so these life forms are actually solubilizing these minerals into a form that the plant can then utilize and take up. So they are swapping and exchanging. And the plants actually, through their photosynthetic process, about 25% of all that they produce through that process is exuded through the roots to benefit the lives of others, which I think is a wonderful lesson of stewardship. You know, the blessings that God flows into our lives, we're able to let them flow out to others to benefit other forms of life. And then they in turn around and bless us. You know, Jesus taught us that it's more blessed to give than to receive. And he said, give and it will be given unto you. And I have seen that over and over and over again. And the more I understand God's ways and align my life and live my life in harmony with those laws that are part of what nature teaches and what the Bible teaches, I find that I'm less and less dependent on a man-made system for my sustenance, but I'm becoming more and more dependent on God's system for sustenance, not just through plants that I can eat, but through that law of giving and receiving through other people. And I find I have an abundance of produce. I'm able to give it away to people, and it just flows back. You give and they flow back to you. And I believe as we head into these troublous times, as we learn to become more dependent on growing our own food and surviving when life is becoming very difficult and ultimately where we can't buy and sell, I believe that these are the laws that we'll be operating on. These are the things that God designs that we will experience him and his way of supporting us. And then when ultimately everything is stripped away from us, God will take care of us through ravens bringing food to us, through manna, through whatever means that he miraculously will take care of us. But God is going to be with his people. God loves us. We're we're the apple of his eye as his church, and he is going to see us through. But before I take up all our time, I'll go ahead with a few more things in the slide. We grow a lot of crops here at Weimar. One of the crops that has been a wonderful crop to grow is sweet basil. And it's loved by everyone. The scent, the aroma just attracts people. When the ladies go shopping, they can't resist buying a fresh bunch of basil, and it's been a wonderful thing. And we grow many other different crops, tomatoes and cucumbers and things. And I just wanted to give you a couple of slides to give you the context where I'm working and the blessing that I have in this environment. So the title of the presentation is For Such a Time as This. The Lord tells us that he would have us think about moving out of the cities and into the country. In fact, for more than 100 years, we've been receiving this message, and Ellen White said again and again, the Lord has instructed that our people are to take their families away from the cities into the country where they can raise their own provisions, for in the future, the problem of buying and selling will be a very serious one. We should now begin to heed the instruction given us over and over again. Get out of the cities into rural districts where the houses are not crowded closely together. So we've received this counsel. Some people have the blessing of living in the country and some people are still stuck in the cities. But I think with this COVID-19 crisis, more and more people are realizing if ever there was a time that we need to be thinking about moving out of the cities, it's really now. And I see different ministries are starting to talk about it and to encourage people to start praying and looking for the Lord's leading as he opens doors for this to happen. There's another statement here that I want to share with you that also gives us impetus that we really need to be thinking about moving out of the cities. We're told that the plagues of the last days are to be poured out on the inhabitants of the world, who have shown marked contempt for the law of God. God's people should seek to reach the people of the world, proclaiming the truth as it is found in his word. But the time will come when they will have to move away from the cities and live in small companies by themselves. If our people regard God's instruction as of value, they will move out of the city so that they will not be pained by its revolting sights, so that their children will not be corrupted by its vices. Those who choose to remain in the city surrounded by the houses of unbelievers must share the disaster that will come upon them. And so we know ultimately, as this world winds down to its ultimate end, that the city is not going to be the place to remain in, because like Lot was called out of Sodom, him and his family were called, because God is going to pour out his judgments ultimately. But meanwhile, he's going to reach as many as possible. And we have a work to do in reaching the people that are in the cities and to share God's message with them. And part of our message, I believe, is to encourage people as they embrace the message of preparing for Jesus' return, is to move out of the cities. And I believe also that it's not just us working independently. It's us, if we have property in the country, if we have means, if we have the ability to help others, God would have us do that. There are going to be people that just don't have a dime. They can't afford somewhere to go. There are going to be people who are widows. There's going to be all kinds of people of different circumstances that are God's children that want to move out. They're going to need the help of the family of God. And so that's why I think it says here, but the time will come when they will have to move out of the cities and live in small companies by themselves. So that idea of companies, I think, is where God's people are collaborating together to help each other to ultimately get out of this predicament of being stuck in the city and stuck on a man-made system of support. So Ellen White talked a lot about the value of getting involved in agriculture for the benefit of raising children. Now, I don't know how many of you are parents still raising children, but I want to encourage you to be thinking and reading and looking into the blessing that God designed for the development of children in a natural environment. And agriculture provides that. That's where we actually get to plant things and to nurture them and to help them grow. But anywhere in nature, we can really benefit from just being in the trees and on trails and walking and so forth. But there's a special blessing involved in agriculture. One of the things that I have seen, and I read an article about this, the color green. I've got a green shirt on. I'm in a green environment. I like the color green. It's in my name as well. But the color green encourages us to learn. And I read this article where they were talking about how the effect on our brains of the color green, if, for example, they had students take a clear, transparent sheet with the tint of green and put it over what they were studying and read it. And so they compared it with those who didn't do the same. Having that color green over what they were reading and studying actually increased their ability to memorize and to learn. And it just is fascinating to me that God designed green to be the predominant color in nature, and that the first classroom was out in nature that God created for Adam and Eve, and there they could learn in a better way than stuck inside four walls where who knows what the color would be. Now, God really wants his people at this time to become intelligent about the counsel he's given us for agriculture to be part of our lives and to be blessed by it. It was about 4 years ago that there were 3 compilations from the writings of Ellen White that were published within a year of each other without any collaboration. One of them is called The Counsels on Agriculture was compiled by John Dysinger, another one, The Green Print, and then Hope in the Soil. These 3 books are a tremendous blessing. I would encourage you, if you don't have a copy, to obtain one. I believe they're all available on Amazon. You'll at least find one of them there. And prayerfully read through it, because there's counsel there for parents who are homeschooling. There's counsel for schools that have a classroom of children. There's counsel for pastors. There's counsel for people that are in some kind of medical work, medical missionary work. There's counsel for the end times that to help us to see what God would have us do to prepare for the increasing crisis that is coming on this world. And there's counsel in there for the spiritual lessons, the spiritual dynamic that God built into the experience of working with him through agriculture. So I'd encourage you to get a copy of one of these books and take advantage of this resource. As was mentioned before, I am the chairman of the board for the Adventist Agricultural Association. This organization has been around for about 7 years now, and we have seen God lead in a tremendous way. He raised this movement up. I don't have time to tell you all the details, but he impressed a number of individuals at the same time with the same burden to have this association. Then he brought us all together and formed this group. And it's been a tremendous blessing. We're seeing the ripple effects now of this movement. And I believe we're yet to see some great revivals, I believe, and reformation coming to God's church through agriculture. We used to have it as part of our schools. We used to have it more as a foundational experience for education, and we lost it because it became not economically viable, and so we turned away from having farms at schools and so on. But I think that ultimately we weren't looking at the other benefits other than the financial benefits of having it as an industry, but actually having it as a classroom, as a lesson book. So God is doing amazing things to bring it back to our attention. Now, if you go to our website, adventistag.org, you'll find a bunch of information there. But I just want to introduce you to our slogan is returning to our roots. Our mission statement is to encourage and support all seeking to understand and follow God's plan for agriculture through networking, mentoring, and information sharing. And we have specific objectives. One is to promote a biologically driven, scientifically sound system of agriculture in harmony with principles found in the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. Number two, to stimulate prayerful study and discussion on the role of agriculture in preparing God's end-time people. And number three, to educate families and individuals about the country living message and embolden them as they transition to an agrarian lifestyle. Number four, to train and equip a new generation of Adventist farmers to fill the need in schools, institutions, and communities. And there's just a huge shortage of Adventist farmers. I get calls all the time, different schools and institutions looking for a farmer. And in fact, one institution said, you know, it's easier to find a doctor to come and work on sacrificial wages than it is to find a farmer. Now, that's quite a crisis, isn't it, when you can't find a farmer? And number five of our objectives is to work with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, its supporting ministries and individual families to elevate and inspire agricultural evangelism and education. So that's our mission, and by God's grace, we are seeking to fulfill that. I want to play, I don't know if this is going to work, but I've got a little video here that was from about nearly 3 years ago, a promotional video, which will give you a little bit of the flavor. We haven't used a promotional video since then. Word of mouth seems to be the most effective way of attracting people to come. We have about 700 people that attend these conferences, and I invite you, if you are interested in learning about agriculture, whether you're a gardener at home, you want to be a gardener, you haven't done it before, or perhaps you're even quite experienced at it, there's a blessing for everyone. Is that coming through, the sound coming through?
Do you ever wonder where your food comes from? Or if it's even safe to eat? And what would happen if the grocery stores were empty and you couldn't buy or sell? Do you ever feel trapped in what society considers normal? Caught in a technology-filled age where families are splintering, priorities are skewed, and what really matters in life is lost sight of? There's a movement sweeping across Adventism, calling people back to their roots, back to creation, back to the land God gave us to tend and keep. Families are uniting in the garden, and real life is being found once again. Attend the 3rd Annual Adventist Agricultural Association Conference and join hundreds of fellow Adventists seeking to gain a deeper experience with God through the garden. This year, our theme is Following Fully, and we will be discovering, like Caleb of old, what it means to follow God fully into the promised land. Whether you're a lifelong farmer or a home gardener who hasn't yet planted your first seed, this conference is for you. Join us January 25 to 28 at Camp Colaqua, Florida.
Well, let me see if I can go back and slide. I skipped over a couple there. Here we go. That was the 3rd. We're coming up to our 7th one now, which is going to be in Glen Rose, Texas. And we have a very nice facility that is in a place where the winter isn't too severe. We can have some outdoor activities and a lot of very beneficial classes. And in fact, this conference coming up is going to be a very practical one. We've got a lot of hands-on activities that are going to be really appreciated. We found that every class where you can have your hands involved, people really flock to those classes. So we encourage you to take a look at that, adventistag.org, and I think that you will really enjoy that. Also, all the past conferences, there were recordings that have been put online with Audioverse, and you will be able to go to Audioverse and look up under conferences, agriculture. You'll see quite a lot of variety of different presentations, from inspirational to practical hands-on seminars. This movement is actually spreading around the world. We're seeing now in Australia, there have been 3 conferences, I believe. There they call it the Cultivate Conference. We've had different ones from our organization who have gone there to speak, and there's quite an interest growing there. We're seeing it go in Europe. I think they're coming up to their 3rd or 4th one now, and I'll be traveling there in January, provided the travel restrictions have been lifted and the Lord wills that this goes ahead. So we're seeing that God is touching a chord in people's hearts all around the world. I was in Africa in November for their first agricultural conference. It was held at the Adventist University called Valley View. And I was very impressed to see there was about 40 pastors who attended it, and they were very excited. In fact, the 2 unions there in Ghana have embraced ADAGRA and working closely with ADAGRA. And we have some exciting projects that are being developed right there, and I'd love to share them with you, but perhaps we'll have another opportunity to do that. But God is really bringing us back to the significance of agriculture and the role it plays in us as Adventists and in the people of the world as they're becoming concerned about many things. And I want to just talk briefly now about, the things that we see happening spiritually in the world, and we're seeing the things that we've been talking about in prophecy for some time. We see that there's agitation of the idea of keeping Sunday holy, and perhaps this is going to lead to a Sunday law. There are issues to do with health that are of concern, and I will address that a little bit briefly. There's an environment in the country and working with nature that really boosts our happiness. And I'll just mention this, and that is that God created unseen forms of life that when we where we can benefit from them, they actually make us happier. For example, there is a bacteria in the soil called Mycobacterium vaccae, and this bacteria actually raises your serotonin levels. And so it's just a byproduct of being around there in nature, working in the soil. You probably breathe it in, you get it on your skin, and it makes you happier, it makes you smarter. There was a study done with, I believe it was with mice, where they actually, I believe they injected or exposed the mice to this bacteria, one group, and then the control group, they didn't, and they put them through an identical maze. The ones that had this bacteria were more than twice as fast figuring out how to get through the maze compared with the ones who didn't. So just that bacteria not only makes you happy, but it actually makes your brain function in a much better way. So if you're raising children, educating your children with the ABCs of education, agriculture, there's a great benefit in that. And then there's the spiritual growth. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the what we're seeing with prophecy. You've probably heard this being bounced around. The Pope is talking about climate change, and I think that it looks like he might use this as a Trojan horse to bring in a Sunday focus and ultimately a Sunday law, as we know that's going to happen. And so in his encyclical letter called Laudato Si, it's actually well written, very well written about taking care of this earth, uses a lot of good scripture in it, but ultimately at the end, he gives it a twist and takes the focus off the seventh-day Sabbath and talks about Sunday, like the Jewish Sabbath is meant to be a day which heals our relationships with God, with ourselves, and with others, and with the world. And so they were going to have this, what they called a summit on the environment at the Vatican this month, and it's been cancelled due to the COVID-19 travel restrictions. And but they were going to have many from different sectors of society come together and discuss the issue of the environment. And I'm sure that it was going to include this day of rest. And so he concludes saying, let us seek solutions together, boldly undertake processes of change, and look to the future with hope. I invite everyone to work for this alliance and to be committed individually and within our communities to nurturing the dream of a humanism rooted in solidarity and responsive both to humanity's aspiration and to God's plan. Now, of course, his idea of God's plan is Sunday worship or Sunday keeping. And very recently, he spoke about the novel coronavirus, suggesting that the global pandemic might be one of nature's responses to the man-made climate crisis. And he says, this is the time to take the decisive step to move from using and misusing nature to contemplating it. So it's definitely being agitated, and not just by the Pope and from his position of influence, but we're seeing it now in other sectors. This is just 4 days ago, a Baptist paper online called The Message, May 2. The conclusion of this article says, could something as simple as observing 1 day of rest for every 6 days of work make a difference in air quality and thus reduce the dire ecological impacts from pollution that many scientists predict for our world? The numbers produced by this one study, with only about a third of the global population under a partial or full lockdown, seem to suggest the impact would be statistically and practically significant. As for the economic impact on businesses, from being closed 1 day of the week, Chick-fil-A has done quite well by closing on Sundays, generating more sales per store in 6 days than its 3 closest competitors combined achieve in 7. A day of rest is not a solution for the proliferation of plastics in the oceans, etc., but when it comes to reducing airborne pollutants, 1 day off in 7 seems to be more than makes sense. It is wisdom from above. So this question of Sunday is being agitated, but actually the Bible gives us the reason why the the world is in the condition that it is. In Isaiah 24, verses 4 to 6, it says that the earth mourns and fades away, the world languishes and fades away, the haughty people of the earth languish. The earth is defiled under its inhabitants. Why? Because they have transgressed the laws, and I believe that to be broader than just the law of God. It's the laws of nature that were there in the Bible and part of his creation. They've changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore, the curse has devoured the earth. Very interesting, as we've turned away as people on this earth, we've turned away from God's ways, and the results have been devastating. If you like to listen to podcasts and you're interested in agriculture, I encourage you to listen to this one here, the Regenerative Agricultural Podcast. This one, John Kempf, who's actually an Amish guy, very brilliant. He reminds me of David Ashrick. He's got that kind of photographic memory, and he has the ability to pull the scientific knowledge together in a very practical way. But on this podcast, he is interviewing Ray Archuleta, who is considered to be one of the fathers of the organic movement. And they have a very interesting conversation where they talk about how Darwinian thinking has led to the system of agriculture that has really done a destructive work to the soil and to the systems that were designed to promote health, both to humans and to the plants. And they talk about the spiritual dynamic as well. It's an excellent talk to listen to if that's an area that interests you. The Bible tells us in Romans 8 in verse 19 that creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. So the creation, God's creation that is able to feel and experience things, is under this curse that has been brought about by man, by the misuse and the abuse that we have afflicted upon it. And of course, ultimately, when Jesus comes back and he recreates this world, creation is going to be out of that bondage. But it's interesting, as we look to the Bible, we find in Job that Job was a very successful farmer. Job was considered a son of God. He was called that. He was in a special meeting where the representatives of the worlds that God created came together. And in Job 31 and verses 38 to 40, the last part where Job is responding to his friends who are accusing him of being a sinner and that God was punishing him and he just needed to confess up, we get a glimpse in this verse of his farming practices where he was actually what we would term today a regenerative farmer. And he says, if my land cries out against me and its furrows weep together, if I've eaten its fruit without money or caused its owners to lose their lives, then let thistles grow instead of wheat and weeds instead of barley. What's fascinating about this verse is that there's a lot of science today that is showing the wisdom of what he's saying here. He says, you know, if my land cries, if my soil, that could be translated as, cries out against me and its furrows weep together. Do you know the life forms in the soil, they communicate? And I believe that God even hears their cry. You know, he's interested in the smallest parts of his creation as well as he is in the larger and the more significant forms of life. And if he says, if my soil is testifying against me that I have been irresponsible, then maybe there's something to what you're saying. He says, if I've eaten its fruit without money, we could say that he's cropped the land year after year after year, and he hasn't fed the life forms in the soil. He hasn't nurtured their life. And he says, or if I've caused its owners to lose their lives. This is exactly what we're seeing happening in conventional agriculture today. All the chemicals that are just being poured out upon the ground. The life in the soil is just being killed and so on. So we find that Job, as a son of God, was responsible, in the form of farming that he embraced was one of nurturing the systems of life that work together in symbiosis to produce abundant crops and harvests that are blessed by God. So I believe that as we look at agriculture, as we look at systems of agriculture, we need to see that there are two different forms that are being promoted in the world today. There's a system that is based on a Darwinian competitive model that compromises health of both of the plants and of human beings. And then there's one that was designed by God. In the spirit of prophecy, we are told this: the greater the length of time the earth is laid under the curse, the more difficult has it been for man to cultivate it and make it productive. As the soil has become more barren and double labor has had to be expended upon it, God has raised up men with inventive faculties to construct implements to lighten labor on the land groaning under the curse. But God has not been in all man's inventions. Satan has controlled the minds of men to a great extent and has hurried men to new inventions, which has led them to forget God. Now, this was a very puzzling statement as I read it and I looked at its context. It was written in the 1860s, so it was fairly early in Ellen White's ministry that she wrote this. And I thought, what on earth was going on in agriculture in the 1860s that she would say that Satan has been controlling the minds of men and led them to invent things that lead them to forget God? Well, I did a little research to try and find what was being developed at that time. And we find from the 1840s that commercial farming really started to take off. And by the time you get to 1849 was when mixed chemical fertilizers were first sold commercially. And the rest of the inventions there, I think, would come under the category where she was talking about these labor-saving devices that ease the effects of the curse. And what we see today is that the result of excessive use of chemicals is really doing a detrimental work to the environment, our pollinators, and many different forms of life, and ultimately human health is being affected from this. So I think she was referring to the chemical fertilizers as best as I've been able to tell. Now, in our day, we're seeing all kinds of things happening in agriculture, from confined animal feeding operations where animals are crowded together, they're force-fed with things that they wouldn't naturally eat, they're unhealthy, they're pumped with antibiotics and medications to keep them alive, and then their products are being given to human beings to consume. And I believe that this, along with chickens and other life forms that are crowded into very inhumane conditions and then being pushed upon the public for food, is really having a toll on the health of human beings. Now, you're probably aware of the debates over genetic modified organisms, foods that have been modified. As far as I'm aware, there has not been any science that has shown that the genetic modification itself is harming human beings, but there is research now that's showing that the Roundup resistant forms of genetic modification, where the chemicals themselves that are absorbed by the plants and then in turn eaten by human beings, is having a detrimental effect on people's health. And I think they're only just starting to really bring it to the forefront. But what we see here is that as these chemicals like glyphosate is being poured upon the earth, started being used predominantly in the 1990s, and here we are in 2020. I haven't seen a graph that has been updated, but this one ends in 2009. But you can see there that the deaths caused by Alzheimer's followed an increase with the increased use of glyphosate. So that's one of the correlations, along with many. Autism, another area that there's concern about. Back in the 90s, it was a relatively small number of children that had autism. And now we're seeing that there is also an unprecedented number and an increasing rise in autism, just as the increase of the use of this glyphosate upon crops. Now, Monsanto is the main producer of Roundup, glyphosate product, claims that Roundup is harmless to humans, bacteria, fungi, algae, parasites, and plants. They use a 7-step metabolic route known as the shikimate pathway for biosynthesis of aromatic amino acids. Glyphosate inhibits this pathway, causing the plant to die, which is why it's so effective as an herbicide. Monsanto says humans don't have this shikimate pathway, so it's perfectly safe. Dr. Seneff, however, points out that our gut bacteria do have this pathway, and that's crucial because these bacteria supply our body with crucial amino acids. Roundup thus kills beneficial gut bacteria, allowing pathogens to grow, interferes with the synthesis of amino acids, including methionine, which leads to shortages in critical neurotransmitters and folates, chelates, important minerals like iron, cobalt, manganese, and much more. Even worse, she notes, additional chemicals in Roundup are untested because they're classified as inert. Yet according to a 2014 study in Biomed Research International, these chemicals are capable of amplifying the toxic effects of Roundup hundreds of times over. So this just gives you a glimpse into the concerns there are with modern agriculture. This doctor, Dr. Arden Anderson, he was an agronomist before he became a medical doctor, and so he has a very unique career that he focuses a lot on how human health starts with the way we treat the soil. And he says, ultimately, to change human health, we have to go back and change the soil, because that's where food comes from, and that's really where preventative medicine begins, right in the soil. So I'm sharing this information with you because I believe more than just a reaction to our call to come out of the cities, more than a reaction to this COVID-19 crisis, more than just having a safe or having a food supply, we need to be actually looking that we've got a healthy food supply to live on that is really going to benefit us. Now, I didn't tell you at the beginning, but you probably can tell by my accent that I'm not from the United States of America. I'm originally from the beautiful country of New Zealand, and this was a common scene around where my home was. Dairy farms are all over the country. It used to be sheep farms, and dairy farms have taken over, most of them. But the dairy cows, as they are grazing, each day they have a new paddock with fresh grass, and it's so healthy, you know, it looks wonderful. In fact, it's kind of makes us laugh in New Zealand when we see that grass-fed products of animals sold as health products here in the United States, because that's not the normal for animals to be out grazing, whereas in New Zealand that is the norm. But what I learned from this, it really helped me understand what's going on with a lot of our produce that we buy in the supermarket. And that is that the cows, when they're in a field, they're in a paddock there, they're crowded in there, sometimes hundreds into one paddock. Then they're moved off after they've grazed there to the cow shed to be milked twice a day. That paddock is then closed up for another month, and the grass grows back before they rotate back to that paddock. Now, wherever their manure has hit the ground, the grass grows lush and green and tall and beautiful, looks better than anything else. And I remember even as a kid, you know, picking some of that grass and handing it to a cow to give it to eat, thinking I was giving it the best, and the cow would turn away and not want to eat it. And I never understood why until I started understanding a little bit of the soil science and how plants respond to what's in the soil. So what we find with the grass that grows over a cow paddy, it's not the smell of the cow paddy that turns the cow away from eating it. What it does is it produces a very fast watery growth, a nitrogenous growth that looks beautiful to our human eye, but cows actually have an intelligence that we don't have. God created them to be able to smell nutrition through their nose. And so they can smell that grass that looks beautiful to us, and then they can smell the short grass that wasn't grown with that strong nitrogen input, and so they will graze the grass all the way around, right down to the dirt, before they start eating that long grass. So why am I sharing this? It's because I believe today what we are seeing is that our food is being produced much in the same manner as that grass that the cows won't eat until they're desperate. Now here you see a picture of two butternut squash. This shows you what I'm talking about. One butternut squash was bought from Walmart. The other one was grown in a home garden where the focus was on getting the soil healthy and producing nutrient-dense food. Now, these two butternut were sent off to a laboratory, and they were basically heated and reduced to ash, where they were able to analyze the mineral content and do a comparison. And it's very interesting that the results of this show that the one that was grown in healthy soil actually had a Brix, which is the sugar or the mineral content that is measured through degrees Brix using a refractometer, had 14, and it had a nutrient density rating of 105.6. The one that was bought at Walmart had a Brix reading of nearly half at 7.5, and it had a poor Brix rating of 53.1, again, nearly half of what the nutrient dense one. So we see that the food, in fact, the federal government have documentation. They've been monitoring the nutrient content of food for many decades, and their records show that there's been a constant decline in the nutrient content of food as the chemical increase. Let me backtrack. As we've been taking from the soil over and over again and not replenishing the soil and killing life in the soil, the food is becoming less and less nutrient dense. Now, a lot of food that we eat, like greens and cucumbers and tomatoes and even our berries, are grown hydroponically. Now, there are debates about hydroponics, that you can put all the minerals in the water solution and feed the plants so they get all the minerals. However, they never mention that the plant's immune system and defense system, where it produces phytochemicals that benefit our health, the immune system of a plant comes from the bacteria in the soil and its interaction with that soil, which it cannot get from the water. And so in these environments where they're raising these plants in water, if one pathogen gets in there, it can wipe out an entire crop very quickly because the plant doesn't have its defense system. I think this is very relevant because where do we get our health from? Where do we get our defense system from? It's from eating plants that have these phytochemicals in them, and then we benefit to have the same boost to our immune system. So for such a time as this, I believe we as Adventists should be growing with integrity, considering the benefit to others and to ourselves more than the bottom line. And I think greed and maybe ignorance and maybe the education that has been promoted from the context of a Darwinian worldview of the survival of the fittest has really brought us to the place we are at today. I'm going to wrap it up now. I'll just mention that there are all kinds of studies out there. If you get involved in gardening, the risk of dementia is reduced up to 47%. It's a huge thing. As you get older, if you spend time in the garden, the quality of life, the longevity, the risk of many things are reduced greatly by just spending time in the garden. And so, as I mentioned before, you're raising children. For such a time as this, our children need an agricultural experience as they face immense social pressures to conform to the world. There is, Ellen White talks about the lesson of learning to cooperate with God as being one of the lessons that we learn through agriculture. I'll read this statement because I think it's a very powerful one that parents should really take note of. In connection with your home, have a garden if possible where your children can work and where you can work with them. So instruct them and so arrange their work that their spare time will not be spent in idleness. Give them something definite to do and let them feel that they are doing something to help father and mother to sustain the family. Let the older ones feel the responsibility of giving a right example to the younger children. Let all act a part according to their years. When the children thus trained attend school, they will have clear minds. They will be able to reason for themselves and will not accept that which this one says or what one says without some proof. So we know that the purpose of our Christian education is to create thinkers and not reflectors of men's thoughts. And so the garden, as they see the laws of nature and they work in cooperation with God, it leads them to have the kind of mind that thinks and that can see that there's cause and effect. And so I think this is very, very valuable for young people. I have the privilege of working with a bunch of young children. In fact, there's quite a revival of interest in agriculture, and here at Weimar, many families are getting into gardening. I've never seen so much going on this campus with gardening as this year. And so I have quite a few children that come to the farm for 2 hours in the morning, and they help with what needs to be done. I try to make it educational and take a little time where I'm able to teach them valuable things. And they really enjoy it. And so during the month of March, we did some grafting and the kids really enjoyed that. And now we just looked at them today and the leaves are coming out and they're seeing the growth. They were excited.
It was really fun.
They really enjoy themselves. We take care of these young trees, stripping off the fruit in the first year or two so that they're not burdened by bearing fruit. We talk about the spiritual lessons and they really listen and they're very interested. We're tying up branches so that the heavy fruit won't break the branches, and they get to plant seeds and then see them germinate, that miracle of life, and then plant them, transplant them out into the field. And they love to drive the tractor and they love to be involved in everything. They just want to have a part of it. And so it gives us many opportunities to talk, and there's no place like working in a garden or on the farm to actually bond with people. I've never had an experience, even with playing games and having fun. I've never had such an experience where I find that it's so easy to connect with people. In fact, I find the garden becomes such a unifying experience. You have people that normally don't get on, they don't just click, but you get them together in a garden, all of a sudden they click. And I think that's how God intended it to be, that we would be drawn close to him. And as a result of being drawn close to him, we're drawn close to each other. And so this statement again, the Lord first created the seed and gave it to the earth. By his divine power, he took care of that seed, and by dying, the seed gave its life to the blade, which contained in itself the seed to be treasured and again put into the earth to yield its harvest. Then the cooperation of man comes in. The human agent has his part to act, his work to do. This is one of the lessons nature teaches. It is a solemn, a beautiful work. Every day when I pray, I thank God for the privilege I have of working with him and cooperating with him. And I ask him, teach me more. I want to experience more of working with you and cooperating with you because it's such a joyful experience. And I believe that God is opening up many, many opportunities through this experience and through people's desire to learn through nature. I believe that we have an evangelistic advantage through nature, through agriculture, to help people who maybe wouldn't be interested in hearing the word of God, excuse me, but they would be interested through the avenue of nature and agriculture and food. So for such a time as this, I believe God would have us connect with him through growing food and preparing for his soon return, where for eternity, what are we going to be doing? We're all going to be farmers. We're all going to be working on the Lord's farm in the earth made new, and we're going to have the time of our lives. We're going to be so amazed, so blown away, so in awe of our Creator. And I think that every day, every Sabbath that we come and worship him, because of the experience that we've had through the week of seeing him at work, working with him, we will naturally bow down and with joy in our hearts worship him, because we've experienced him all through the week, through that experience. So I hope this has been a blessing to you. I hope it has encouraged you to, if you aren't already, getting your hands in some soil, start off small, do something. You'll be really blessed. God will be with you. I believe that angels draw near to us when we're in that environment, and that they minister to us and they encourage us. So many in this world are suffering from all kinds of different illnesses, mental illnesses and things. And in the environment God created, it's like he starts reviving and bringing back life where there has been sadness and death. So God bless you, and I'll be happy to dialogue with you and answer any questions if you have any questions. As was mentioned, I'll be happy to stick around and try to answer as best I can, or point you to some resources that will be helpful for you.
All right, Pastor Greenfield, can't not thank you enough for that wonderful, wonderful presentation. As you take down that screen, click on your chat there at the bottom after the screen's closed out, and it should bring up some messages and some comments that you can look at, and then we'll let you kind of go start at the top and scroll down and address those.
See the chat here?
Yes.
All right, it's on the right-hand side, I see it.
Yes.
So from Celia, question: how much land does it take to grow and feed one person or a 4-person family? That's a good question. I think you could possibly survive off 1/4 of an acre. I think 1 acre would be more feasible, and I think even more than 1 acre would be even better. We're encouraged to eat a lot of fresh fruit. That was part of man's original diet before herbs were introduced. Ellen White talks about the benefits of eating fresh fruit as it is picked straight from the tree. I believe they're jam-packed with vitamins and nutrients that, as they sit around on the shelf or through transportation, are lost, and we don't get those benefits. So trees take up quite a bit of space, and they take quite a bit of time to grow and get productive. So I would encourage you, as you're looking at putting in a garden to sustain yourselves, look at putting in a good orchard. In fact, it would be probably beneficial to have 1 acre of orchard, and you could have many varieties of fruit trees and nut trees and so on in that orchard. Okay. Let's see here. Looking for more questions here. Here's one from Adriana. Why we cannot use cow manure? We can use cow manure, but however, manures are best to be composted first. When it's fresh and it's put on the ground, it's not the best in the best condition to be used. And I specifically don't use the commercially available manures, whether it be chicken or cow manure, because they primarily come from factory farmed facilities where the animals are very sick. And if you remember some of the outbreaks of diseases like salmonella and the like that people have even died from, they have come from these, not all of them, but some of them have come from facilities that have used manure on the ground to fertilize their plants, and the rain or irrigation has splashed some of the pathogen onto the plant that has then been taken and eaten by people. So I avoid using those types of products. I do use, there's one product that I use that's called seabird guano. Comes from Peru. It's from ocean birds that are free and wild. And they probably for centuries have been pooping on an island somewhere, and they've collected up their manure, and it has been bagged and sold. It's actually a 12-12-2 or a 12-11-2 NPK, and it seems to produce some very good results. So that, I think, if you're able to get manures from clean operations where animals are not in sick conditions, manure is a good thing. In fact, I believe as we look at the system that God designed and created, take, for instance, a bird eats a fruit, say it's a berry or something like that. It digests it, it goes through its gut, and then the bird goes and poops that out on the ground somewhere. And that seed has gone through the gut. It's been inoculated with bacteria that are beneficial. It's deposited on the ground with a fertilizer package, and then that seed is able to grow with that fertilizer and with that inoculation and become a healthy plant. So as we look at the design that God has given, manures do play a vital role, I believe, in a growing system. We don't have to be dependent on them, but I think as we look at sustainable systems for growing, especially when we cannot buy inputs, I believe animals will be part of that system. Okay, let's see. Let's have a look here. Next question. This is from Dan Kelly. I am starting to put together some raised beds. Can I fill them with peat moss? I wouldn't recommend peat moss per se. Peat moss is a good material in potting mixes. What I've noticed with peat moss is that it's very free draining. And in the hot summer days, if you have a lot of peat moss in a bed, it can dry out very quickly. Peat moss tends to be a bit acidic as well. And so plants ideally want to be in a pH of about 6.5. And so if you have predominantly peat moss, it's going to be more acidic and not necessarily the best environment for plants to grow in. I would encourage you to check out some of the talks that Adagra has had at the conferences on soil testing and mineralization. I believe that the best way is to test your soil and then see what is there. It's kind of like opening your refrigerator and your cupboards in your kitchen, seeing what's there and what's lacking, and writing a list for your shopping, and then you go and shop and buy what you need to replenish your cupboards and refrigerators so that you have food for the next week. So when we're growing, if we do a soil test and have it analyzed, we see what's in the cupboard of the soil, and we know what we need to purchase and then apply to the soil so that we have that well-balanced diet available to the plants. Plants need a lot of calcium, and depending on where you're at, there are places where you have calciferous soils, and then you have many places with clay soils like we have here that are very deficient in calcium. So testing your soil is important. I would encourage, if you're wanting to make up a soil medium and you're not wanting to go down the route of testing soil, maybe you're only just doing a couple of raised beds and it's not economically feasible. If you were to get good topsoil, now a tip for good topsoil is, if you look at soil, the most mobile part of soil is the most fertile part. And so what we find with rains, that the most fertile soil washes down into the valleys. That's why most of agriculture is done in the valleys and the flatter areas where this fertile soil has washed down and built up over time. And so if you can get topsoil from a valley, from an area that hasn't been farmed and is kind of virgin soil, and put that into your raised bed, it's still going to be lacking some nutrients, but it's going to give you the best start. Then if you're able to get your hands on some worm castings, You can add 10% of worm castings into the soil and get very good results. Compost is good. However, the source of compost, some compost is not good. Some of the bag compost that you will buy at Home Depot or some places like that, not anything more than just ground up bark and manure that's been mixed together and sold as compost. And one of the things when you're using woody products, wood byproducts like bark, they are still being decomposed. And as they're being decomposed, they need nitrogen to help with that decomposition process. And so the nitrogen that is there in the soil or that you've applied as fertilizer that plants need can be sucked up by those woody products as they're decomposing and actually cause your plants to be deficient. If you notice on your leaves of your plants, sometimes they start yellowing. That's an indication of a nutrient deficiency. Could be nitrogen, could be some other nutrients. And plants have the ability to translocate nutrients. So the newer leaves that are growing, the growth tips, they will take nutrients from the older leaves and transfer them to the younger leaves. And so that's why you see the older leaves that are starting to yellow. We find that if the plant has the proper nutrition, you don't get that happening with the older leaves. The older leaves will still stay a beautiful green color. So that's probably more information than you were looking for, but hopefully that was helpful to you. Okay, another question here. Okay. Do you suggest using no-till practices? Excuse me, just a second. I'm working in a pollen-filled environment, so a little bit of hay fever at this time. So do you suggest using no-till practices? I think that there's a place for no-till, definitely in certain soil types that are already built up, that have good life and nutrients in them. You keep the life alive better by not tilling. However, we have very hard clay soils here, and if you try to practice no-till on the virgin clay soil, you're not going to have very much success. So we do till here. The Bible talks about tilling. In fact, Adam and Eve were given the work of tilling the soil. So there is a place for tilling. And so I wouldn't say it's a one size fits all, but the healthier the soil becomes, I believe that you can lessen the amount of tillage and even get away from it. I have seen farms that don't till that have good results because they have worked on building their soil up over the years. So I think to start with, you will probably need to till and work in the nutrients that you're feeding the soil. Another question here. Can we use the leaves from maple? Yes, you can. In fact, you can, probably the best thing is to build a compost pile. When I was living and working in Michigan, we have a property there on 10 acres and a lot of maple trees there. And when I planted my garden there, one of the things I did was I took the tractor with the back blade and I went under the maple trees and I scraped up all that leaf mold, all the decomposing leaf from the surface under there. And then I incorporated that into my garden and the plants loved it. So maple leaves can produce good compost and good and improve the health of your soil. So the next question here from Shirley is, what about the use of seawater in the garden? Seawater, we use seawater. I've been using it now for about, I would say, 7 or 8 years. It was first introduced to me by Lynn Hoag, and Lynn Hoag promotes it, and he's seen very good results. Personal experience that I had with using ocean water or dehydrated ocean water, a product called C90. When I first started using that, I used to have a skin condition called seborrheic dermatitis, and it would break out as a red rash around my eyebrows, under my on the edge of my hair, and especially when I was stressed or had a late night, or my immune system was compromised from eating junk food or something like that, I'd get this rash breakout, and a kind of an orangey, crusty scab would develop on it. And that's what they call seborrheic dermatitis. The doctors say there's no cure for that. And you can use a prescription shampoo to help suppress it. And you can buy ointments as well, prescription ointments. But I didn't find they were that helpful. But as soon as I started eating food that was grown using the ocean water, within 1 month of eating that food, it cleared up and went away, and I haven't had an issue with it since that time. So I do believe that it has its place. However, let me caution you, if you do not know what your sodium levels are in your soil, you could very easily increase already high rates of sodium in your soil to where it becomes toxic, and plants will not grow very well there. So typically those are in arid parts of the country, like Arizona, New Mexico, where they have a very low rainfall. So you really want to find that out. And if you do a soil test and get the results, you will see what your sodium levels are like. And I would encourage you to use the services of a man called Whitmar McConnell. He is living in Kentucky, and I use him for our recommendations after the results come from the lab. And he will tell you how much you can actually put down safely. And we typically are putting between 100 and 200 pounds per acre of this dehydrated ocean water, a product called C90 that is sold by a company called C Agri. So definitely worth checking that out. I think it's a very beneficial. The microbes in the soil love it as well. A question from Daniel Anderson. I'm not sure if this is, if I can understand. I'm worried about any animal. We can't tell their condition. I think you're referring, Daniel, to manure, where you get these manures you can purchase. You don't know whether the animal is healthy or not, and whether it's safe to use. And I agree with that. Next question is from Peter and Nancy. We live in Zone 4, Maine. What are your thoughts about raised beds versus containers versus the garden? We have pesky groundhogs, moles, and voles. Well, they are quite a problem. And they're pretty hard to fence out because they burrow under the ground and come into your, whether they be raised beds or contain, well, I guess containers they can't get in. But the problem with containers are you're very restricted how much you can grow in a container. Let me see here. The screen just jumped down. As far as groundhogs and moles and voles, I think we have to trap these critters, either remove them far away from the property or kill them if they're infesting the place and really doing damage. It's not something I like to do. I have a problem with ground squirrels, and I have to trap them and shoot them. It's not a pleasant thing. I think as we are developing Christ-like characters, killing is not a sport. It's something that we, if we have to do it, it's not a pleasant thing, because we want to cherish life and not kill life. But I think that there are times it's necessary that we need to do that. Next question is from Russell Miner. What vegetables grow best at the beginning of the growing season when the weather is still cool? There is a chart that you can find online that has the things that grow at different temperatures. At cold temperatures, you can grow radishes, you can grow beets. Well, maybe not. They won't grow at freezing temperatures, obviously, but they can still survive. Your kale can survive. I've had kale that's been snowed on, and the snow melted away, and they survived. So there are cool weather crops that can grow. Turnips, I think, is another one. I love beets. I find beets are an amazing crop. They're hardy. You can grow them at the beginning of the season, early, and then you just harvest them when you want to eat them, and they will store in the ground right through the summer, right through the winter, and it's not until April that they start bolting and going to seed. So I don't have to have a big refrigerator to store them. I can just leave them in the ground and just harvest them when I want to eat them. And I find that even some of them become like almost as big as a football. They're still tender and sweet and beautiful. They're not woody and fibrous. So I love beets. They're an energy producing vegetable, and they're full of nitric oxide, which actually can really give you a boost. In fact, I'm told that athletes can drink the juice of beets, and it has a similar effect to some of these illegal drug enhancing, performance enhancing drugs. So beets are really good. I need that boost when I'm working hard on the farm, so I eat them regularly. The next question here from Shirley. Are there negatives to avoid in the use of perlite in gardening? Perlite is typically used as a drainage material. It's often used in potting mixes, so that when you start your seedlings, you don't have a waterlogged condition where seeds can actually rot instead of germinating, and so that you don't have an anaerobic condition that can cause root rot and so on. As far as using it in a raised bed or in a garden, I probably wouldn't use it. I think using compost, using some other materials to try to loosen up the soil, which will provide good drainage as well as nutrition, I think would be better than perlite. I'm not really experienced at using perlite in a garden, but I don't think I would want to use it. Another question is from Glenda. Is horse manure safe to use, and is mushroom compost good to use? The first part, horse manure. Horse manure can be good. What we find, Lynn Hoag actually found, he was growing an acre of tomatoes one year, several years ago, and every year he would use horse manure, and he would get it from a large horse facility. And this particular year, they were supposed to deliver it, and it came late. So he planted probably 3/4 of his acre with tomatoes before the horse manure arrived. And then he used the horse manure when it was available, and he found that his plants were a little bit sick and a little bit yellow, and they didn't grow very well. Well, he was really puzzled by this, and so he did some investigation, only to find that these horses had been eating genetically modified alfalfa that had been sprayed with this glyphosate product, a Roundup, and therefore the horses had ingested this alfalfa, and then it was in its manure. So the herbicide was there in the manure, and instead of the manure giving a boost to the plants, it was actually suppressing their growth. So if you can get manure from horses that you know they've been eating non-GMO products, then I think it will be beneficial. But it's always best to compost your manures and then use them. And that takes a bit of time, but you will get better results. Another question here. I am in Florida and the grounds are sand. I am trying to grow a garden, but I was planning to use cow manure. I don't have any knowledge. Can you please tell me what brand soil is the best to buy? As far as buying soils, I have been trying for this several years now to find even a good potting soil for starting my seedlings. And I used to make my own, and it was very, very time consuming. And I was using students to help me mix it, and sometimes they'd be distracted and get the ratios of minerals wrong. And then I'd find my potting soil was not working very well. And so I stopped making my own, and I've been on a mission to find really good potting soil. I have heard that there's a place in Vermont Compost, that has a very good potting soil, and so that's the only one that I know of, that not from experience but from reputation. I currently, for potting soil, I'm buying a product from Peaceful Valley Farm Supply. It's called their Quick Root Mix, and then I'm adding an additional fertilizer that is a corn byproduct that's been fermented, called 711, from a company called Converted Organics, and I mix that in 1 part for 30 parts of the potting mix, and I've had very good results. I'm quite happy, and I think I'll probably stick with that. However, it's not going to be a cost-effective way for filling a raised bed or a garden with that type of potting mix. I would suggest that you get some very good compost, mix it in some, put 10% of worm castings, and if you are able to find out or test your soil once you've mixed that in and find out what else needs to be amended. I have no idea. Sandy soil does not hold nutrients very well, and so it typically is quite hungry and needs a lot of help. One of the practices that really helps build up your soil is cover crops. You can grow different cover crops and then till them under when they've matured before they seed. And you've got the benefit of the roots that have been exuding food into the soil to feed the microbes, and then you've got the breakdown of the green manure that gets included into the soil that will enrich the soil. So gardening is not always something you can do in a hurry. You've got to plan and give nature time to bring results. I think that's all I'll say on that. The next question is from Shirley. Do you use organic ground covers rather than using plastic? I guess I should be embarrassed to say I use plastic mulch. We started using it several years ago. I don't like using plastic. I wish I could get away from using plastic. However, I haven't found anything financially viable yet that is an alternative. We are growing on the hills, and we've got a lot of challenges where we are. And what I found that was using the plastic mulch, it actually has an effect of moisture retention, and that really gives the plants a boost. They grow, they're much healthier, they produce better crops, bigger crops, because the moisture is not evaporating off the soil, and the plants have more access to nutrients. So there are methods, and you can do it on a small scale, where you can build up your soil, make your raised bed, and you can take grass and other organic materials that you can then cover the soil with it, and that will give some mulch. I don't really encourage people to use wood chips, because it's very easy as you dig in the soil for them to get included in the soil. And as I mentioned before, that will suck up the nitrogen needed for the plants. And it's okay if you can keep it on the surface, but as soon as you start trying to dig in the soil, it's almost unavoidable unless you can remove it to get some of it included in the soil. Okay. Peter and Nancy, do you use the E.G. White method for planting fruit trees? If so, could you share your exact recipe? There seems to be a number of recipes that all claim they are E.G. White's. If you want the original source, you can go to Selected Messages Book 2, and there's a chapter there called Specific Light on Gardening. There's 2 pages. One talks about if you've got pests that are damaging your crops, then it's okay to spray them and kill them. It's not a bad thing to do. The other one is describing how she was shown how to plant trees and how they dug a deep hole. They put a layer of rich topsoil in the bottom. They put a layer of rock and then another layer of rich topsoil and soil with dressing above that. And that was how she described it. And so in following that, what we do is we dig a 3-foot wide and a 3-foot deep hole. And I teach a class to the Weimar College students on agriculture. And so each one of them get to dig this hole and plant this way. And we use the measurements of 6 inches of topsoil, 4 inches of rock, 6 inches of topsoil, and then we put, I usually get more topsoil to fill the rest rather than just using, our subsoil is really sticky clay, and so I try to avoid using that. But we mix in with that. If we have some compost, we'll mix that in, worm castings, and then build that up. And then we'll plant the tree at the top. And I usually make the soil raised up a bit and plant it above the ground, because over time it will sink down. And some trees like peaches and others that are sensitive to being waterlogged, they don't like, when that sinks down and water sits around too long. The other thing is in sticky clay soil that doesn't percolate very well, when you do this method, your plants may not grow very well because you create a reservoir that actually traps water, and the plants are sitting in an anaerobic condition. So what I found is I need to do a perk test on the hole that I've dug. And if the water doesn't drain away by the next day, I need to dig a drain away from that hole to allow the water to get away. And then I can safely put those layers in and the tree will be healthy. So that's been my experience. I don't think there's a specific, recipe other than what I just shared with you. Lynn Hoag has been teaching it for years. He has a tree planting kit with minerals, a mix of minerals that are very beneficial. And if you're willing to pay the price for that, Sun Country Gardens, I believe you can find his website and contact him and buy that tree planting kit. And that's very beneficial and you'll get good results. But you still can get good results as long as you're feeding the soil with good nutrients, like compost, manures, and healthy manures, and worm castings. Let's see. Russell, another question here. Just pause for a sec. I need another tissue. Got the tissue box back with me this time. Okay, so Russell asks whoops, it just disappeared. In small plots, do rectangular plots produce more than rows? Not necessarily. If you have a single row, obviously in a rectangular plot, you can crowd more plants into it, but you can have more than one row. You could have, I often plant plants in two side by side in one row. And if you've got a 4-foot wide bed, you could have 4, like my sweet basil. I have 4 rows in there and I can still reach in from the side and harvest very easily. So hopefully that answers your question. Our next question is from Daniel Anderson. We have tried growing strawberries for 2 years in a row, but have not had much success. Any thoughts? We are in zone 6. I'm not experienced growing strawberries. California produces a lot of strawberries along the coast areas where the temperatures are much lower in the summertime, and I believe they can grow them year round. So prices are low on strawberries, and I just have not had much experience with them. So I won't try to answer that question, even though I know a little bit about them just from learning from others and what they share. So the next question from Glenda Church. I had some friends years ago that put their food scraps right into the ground. Then the next year they planted in those paths. Their soil was so beautiful and fluffy, and their food grew in abundance. Do you think that is a good way to compost instead of a compost pile? Yes, you can get good results. In fact, I have a friend who grew up in Africa, and there was an American missionary who taught that method, and they used that with very good results. And I've actually done that myself. I've done that with putting horse manure, digging down deeper, putting horse manure and then covering it up, and planting my crops above where I did that. It's quite labor intensive. And I found that when I removed my plants, the horse manure had not completely decomposed. And when I pulled them out, I found that the roots of that plant had completely embraced all that manure and sucked everything it could out of it. So, and I had a good crop. So yes, I think that is a good thing to do. There's plenty of life in the soil that will decompose the food scraps in the ground. One thing you can do is you can use your blender to blend up your food scraps in like a smoothie, and then pour that around some of your plants or around some of your trees, and the nutrients will be available much faster because you've basically micronized the waste. Okay, so Peter and Nancy, we were told this past week that the cleaner named Bon Ami drives moles and voles away. The person who told us has been sprinkling it around her plants for many years with great success. She is an organic gardener here in Maine. Bon Ami is made from only 2 products, tallow and feldspar. What do you say about worm tea as a liquid fertilizer? We have heard pros and cons. First, thank you for the information about the product for chasing away the moles and voles. I didn't know that, and I don't know if it's available out here, but that sounds like something effective. So worm tea, I have only heard good things about worm tea. I'm not sure what the cons would be, but worms, God created worms to eat bacteria and composted organic matter in the soil, and they in turn poop out a perfectly balanced fertilizer that is a 222 on the NPK scale, along with many beneficial microbes, and they'll even deposit little worm eggs that look like miniature lemons. And so worm castings are very beneficial, and if you soak in a tea bag, you can get a paint strainer or something like that and put some worm castings and soak it in water overnight. Even better if you have some form of aeration where you can bubble that tea, then you'll multiply overnight you'll multiply the microbial population, and it'll be even more beneficial. I haven't done a lot of it myself. I've done a little bit with it. I had a friend who did a lot, and that was his total fertility program was worm castings, and he had a beautiful garden. So I think that as we look at systems that are going to be sustainable when we can't buy and sell, I believe worm castings are going to be an important part of having a source for our soil fertility inputs. I plan to build a a machine that the worms can live in, and I can feed them, and I can scrape off the bottom the castings without removing the worms. In the future, I hope to do that so that we can have something to feed the soil with, because I believe the time is not going to be too far in the distant where we will have challenges getting our inputs, especially when we get to the point of not being able to buy and sell. Okay, next question. Have you experienced using biochar? What do you think? I've been using it now for 2 years. I think it's wonderful. Biochar is a form of charcoal that hasn't been activated like the medicinal form that we use. And if you put it in the soil, just straight biochar, the first year you're not going to see results, most likely. But you can inoculate it. And what I do with my biochar is I inoculate it with beneficial bacteria. You can buy it. There's different companies that sell it. I get mine from a company called AEA, Advancing Eco Agriculture. They sell a product called Spectrum, and it has a variety of bacteria. And so I inoculate with that, along with a product that they sell called Rejuvenate that has molasses, I believe some seaweed extract, and some other coenzymes and things that the microbes feed on. And so by inoculating the biochar provides housing for the beneficial bacteria, and all those microscopic cavities in the charcoal, they move in there. So you're providing them with food and housing, and then they, when you include that into the soil, they go to work for you, and then are able to release a lot of nutrition in the soil to make available to the plants. You don't actually have to use a whole heap. In fact, John Kemp from AEA on one of his podcasts said that he's found very positive results from as little as 25 pounds for an acre, and that's really a small amount. So yeah, you can have big effects with very little of that biochar. One thing I will say to you all there, if there's a number of you there in the church that are interested in gardening, if you form a cooperative together, some of these products like the Spectrum bacteria, biochar, and so on, can be quite expensive to buy if you're an individual and you don't have a big garden. You have to buy them in quantities more than perhaps you want or can use in 1 or 2 seasons. But if you form a co-op, you can come together buying some common inputs that you all want to use, and you can buy them in bulk and get them a lot cheaper and cut your costs down a lot. So that's something I think is worth doing, and maybe you can even make a community outreach from your church. I was talking to Pastor Louis Therese about a year ago, and he was doing some meetings in a church where they had a community garden, and he was baptizing several individuals that came to the community garden, and that was their contact with the church. I think that's a very powerful way of making friends with people that might not be interested in some of our normal outreach activities. So the next question from Shirley. Where'd it go? I have heard that there are minerals or fertilizer that makes plants withstand cold weather better. Do you know what they are? Yes and no. If plants have good nutrition, they are healthier, and therefore they're able to withstand the cold better. There is one product that I have used personally that is a seaweed extract. It was called Maxi Crop, and it came in a dry form that you could mix with water, and it would dilute and be absorbed into the water. And then I sprayed it onto tomato plants before a frost came, and it can harden them and enable them to withstand frost I think up to 3 degrees below freezing. So I actually, here in California, we get cold weather in November, and sometimes enough to kill off the tomato plants, or the heat-loving plants. However, that year, every time I saw the temperature going to drop, I would spray the plants with this maxi crop, and sure enough, they withstood the frosts and they survived right into January. They don't grow very fast at all. They hardly grow at all in that cold weather, but the green tomatoes that were still on those plants, I was able to continue harvesting them at a slow rate right up until January, which was pretty amazing. So that is one product that will help you do that. So another question from Art Heath. What about letting the land rest the 7th year? God knows what he's doing, doesn't he? He created this world. He created the soil. He created the life in the soil. And I believe that resting the land in the 7th year is a law for the health of the soil, as much as the health laws that were given in the Bible that we observe as Seventh-day Adventists, such as not eating unclean foods and the like. And so resting the land is more than just enabling the life in the soil to replenish and giving the plants a boost. I believe it was also a lesson in learning to trust God, because he promised that in the 6th year the children of Israel would experience bumper crops, which defies logic, because if the land needs resting, you would think by the 6th year the land's pretty tired. So I think it was to teach Israel that God is the one who gives the harvest and gives the blessing of the increase, and that if we trust him and cooperate with him and work with him, we will see wonderful and even miraculous results. I'll share my personal testimony with that. 2 years ago was the 7th year, and after studying it in the Spirit of Prophecy in the Bible, I was convicted that it was a good thing to do and that I should do it. And so I took that year off. But the 6th year, we had very good results. We had the biggest harvest that we ever had. I wouldn't say it was double, but definitely our sales increased by, I would say, a third increase from the farm. But what was really interesting, when I did my taxes, I found that my total income for that 6th year was double what it had been at a consistent rate for a number of years prior to that. And so God had somehow blessed and increased the income enough to carry me through that next year by doubling my income in the year before. It wasn't all from the farm, but it did show me that God was honoring and blessing the fact that I was willing to step out in faith and follow that counsel, because my income comes from the farm. I'm not paid a salary working here at WEMA. I volunteer my time now for teaching the class and so on. I earn my total income. I'm totally self-supporting. So God really blessed, and it opened the door for wonderful mission opportunities. I was called to go to Africa 3 times and did evangelistic meetings and helped with agricultural projects and so on. And so that was part of God's intention, that the children of Israel would have time for mission work during that 7th year. All right, moving on. Adriana, we are from Michigan and the soil is sandy. The ash from our wood stove, do you think will help? Yes, you can use ash. Ash has a lot of good minerals in it. However, you have to be careful not to use too much. From research that I've done on using ash, the recommendation is not more than 50 pounds for an acre. Ash is typically fairly light, and so 50 pounds is quite a lot. But you can do the math on the square footage of your garden, and an acre is 43,560 square feet, if I'm remembering correctly. And if you have 1,000 square foot garden, then you're going to divide that 50 pounds by 43.56. So I'll let you do the math or find somebody who can do that. So yes, my uncle was actually in Australia, was growing strawberries and other vegetables in his garden. And when I suggested to him to use some ash, he used it, and he told me the next season he had the best results he had seen in a long time. So it really helped his strawberries in his garden. Daniel Anderson has a question. Good night, everyone. Oh, okay, he's saying goodbye. So goodbye, Daniel. You probably already left here. Another one from Adriana. Thank you very much for teaching us a lot. May God bless you abundantly and your family. Thank you so much, Adriana, and God bless you, your family, and your church and your ministry there. Okay, I think the last one we have here is from Glenda. Someone has recently mentioned that one can use painter's paper in the place of plastic for gardening. Would it be worth trying, as it does decompose? It would be like putting cardboard down, but much thinner. Definitely worth trying. I would give it a try. One of the things you want to look into is what agents are used in the forming of that paper. Is there some chemical used in the process that maybe isn't the best, but it more than likely would be good. I know that worms love to eat paper, and we used to feed our worms with shredded paper, and they would gobble it up. Okay. Oh, the other thing I will mention is there are compostable plastic mulches available. We are certified organic here, and I haven't found one available that is approved for organic use. However, I know in Europe and I believe in New Zealand, there are approved decomposable plastic mulches that are they can be used, and they decompose over about 4 months of use, and so you don't have to remove them and dispose of them. So I think there are some products out there that can be useful. All right, well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share and answer these questions. I hope that's been helpful, and I don't claim to have all the knowledge. I'm learning, and I think I'm going to be learning for the rest of my life, and probably for the rest of eternity, because God's creation is so detailed and so intricate that I don't think we're going to run out of things to learn and to be in awe about as we discover what God has made for us.
Amen. Well, I did promise that if there was anybody on the phone that wanted to verbalize a question that didn't have the opportunity to submit it by chat, we'd give you the opportunity. So I'm going to ask you to speak up. And there was one part of the question I made note of, Darren, that you didn't speak to, and just to make sure that that person did get their question answered, it had to do with mushroom compost.
Oh, yes, I was going to, and then I forgot. I have used mushroom compost. I had good results from it, and that was before I started testing soil. I think I used primarily mushroom compost in sandy soil, and I had a beautiful garden with lots of weeds, but it was a productive garden. So yes, mushroom compost I think is good.
Okay. So last chance, anybody, do you have another question that you'd like to ask that has not already been addressed?
I do. Hello?
Okay. Yes.
Oh, well, no, I have 1,000 things I'd like to talk to him about, of course, but, and the mushroom compost, we have a mushroom factory down the road. But anyway, beside all the gardening thing is like, I'm using a product called Trace, and I got iodine and trace minerals, you know, because all our soil is depleted. Do you have any positive thoughts on that? I mean, to supplement, like we buy stuff from the store, do you think that's any value? Because, you know, it's expensive at times.
Yes. Well, what I mentioned before about the sea minerals, that has a lot of trace minerals in it.
Yeah, we use Himalayan salt and Celtic and you know, productive trace minerals to try to replace what's gone.
Yeah, azomite is another good product that you can. It doesn't have the high sodium levels, and you can apply that fairly generously and get amazing results from. So trace minerals are very important to plant health. And
just about, well, the one I understand that one. I'm talking about when you buy it, trace minerals, and you're trying to take it as a supplement.
Oh, for yourself?
Yeah,
I'm not a medical doctor or a health educator other than gardening. I would rather not answer that question because there are many variables to, you know, you don't want to have excessives and you want to, I think just like the soil, you can create problems when you have excesses of a good thing. So I would ask a medical person that's into health education, is knowledgeable in that area when it comes to supplements.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
What was the name of the person in Kentucky who will give you some advice on, I guess, putting supplements on your soil? Whitmar?
Yes, Whitmar McConnell. I'll even give you his phone number. I'll look it up now. He is an Adventist and he's an agronomist, and I've had very good results using his service. And he's farming as well as doing the consulting there. And I think he's getting really busy with the consulting, especially this year. A lot of people are using his service, but here it is. 719 is the area code. 719 and then 641-3859. I'll repeat that again. 719-641-3859. And his name is Whitmar McConnell.
McConnell. Okay, and also somebody said for moles and voles, Boami. Did they have the spell? Did they put the spelling on how
yes,
you spell
they
that?
did. Maybe someone can look that up there.
Darren, are you there?
Yes.
Yeah, Bonami, B-O-N, one word. Was it A-M-I?
Yeah, it means good friend in French.
Okay.
It was first put on the market in 1886, and this organic gardener overheard Peter talking at a farmer's union store about the mole vole problem, and she said, "Excuse me, hate to intrude, but you've got to know about this." And the man at the store brought Peter a can of it. It comes in a shaker like Comet, and we used to use it as a cleaner.
Yeah. Okay, I have some.
Yeah. So they sell a lot of it. We had never heard about it. I'm wondering if you could shake some around the roots of the fruit trees we're going to plant, because we planted some and then they fall over because the voles ate the first year. So I'm wondering if we've got some ready to plant. I'm going to try to put some in some of the holes, just to experiment to see.
Yeah, the other thing
said they absolutely hate Bonami. So she just puts her plants in and she sprinkles a little bit around them.
Now, that's good to know. I've taken note of that. I'm going to look it up.
Because we have more broccoli. Go ahead.
The other thing that I've seen available on the market is you can buy these, looks like not chicken mesh, but bird mesh cages that you can put in a hole and then plant your tree in there. And at least while the plant is young, when the moles and voles tunnel around, it's not going to kill that young plant. So that's something else. Or you could possibly even make one if you're willing to get your fingers pricked with a sharp wire and shape it and tie it together and have something you can put in a hole.
How wide? I mean, Darren, the roots need to be able to go through that wire. And if you get too fine of a wire, how is it going to make it through the wire? Because the voles are pretty, they can get through almost anything. And if the wire is too big, you're defeating your purpose.
Yeah, that's true. So the wire that I've seen, the baskets that are for sale, I believe Peaceful Valley Farm Supply here in California sell them, and there are other places I've seen them. They have about a 1/2 inch diameter hole in them, and the wire is fairly thin, and I believe that it would probably rust away being in the soil and in a moist environment. And roots are incredibly strong as they go through there and as they expand. I would imagine that they would, with the wire rusting and so on, they would eventually just push their way through that hole, that restriction, and continue growing. I saw a tree that was planted in the ground, still in its pot, plastic pot that it came from the nursery, and it put roots through the drainage holes in the bottom, which weren't very big, and it continued to grow, and it just split that pot apart and just grew almost as if it had been taken out of its pot and put in the soil. So plants are amazing things. In fact, I saw a tree in New Zealand where this tiny seed fell in a crack in a big rock, and it had enough moisture there to germinate and put a root down and get some nutrition, and it split that big rock. It really split it open. So there's a lot of power in the roots of a plant.
I've got another question for you, Darren. I made compost tea last year, and I watched several videos and aerating the water and putting molasses in it for food for the bacteria. And I think it came out very well. I didn't kill anything. Well, then I had a big tub of it sitting around, and I took the big tub of it that had probably sat for, who knows, maybe a month. Yeah. And I didn't realize how strong it was. And I put it around one of my pear trees I had just planted with the Ellen White method. Well, I'll tell you what, you don't want to do that. It quickly killed that tree. And so I'm just wondering, from your experience, how long can you let compost tea sit around before it maybe gets too strong, et cetera? I know there's so much conflicting information on YouTube about compost teas. It's hard to know who to believe.
I'm not highly experienced with compost tea.
Worm tea, I should say. Yeah.
Worm tea?
Yeah, worm tea. I'm sorry, it's worm tea. Yeah.
I think from what I understand, the benefit comes from a lot of the bacteria, the microbes that are in it. And if you make it with a bubbling system that aerates it, and then apply it, you can even spray it as a foliar and apply it to the soil. Then the just one 24-hour period of bubbling it can multiply the bacteria by 1,000 times, I'm told. And so that has a lot of beneficial, but if it's sitting, it becomes anaerobic again, and I don't know what happens to that bacteria. I'm not an expert in it. I have a friend who farms on a larger scale than we do, and he buys a compost tea, and then he feeds it through his drip system to his plants, and he has good success with that. But how long that's been sitting around, how concentrated it is, I really don't know. I'm not an expert to answer that kind of question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
Dan, could I
comment? If somebody's looking for that mesh material, I think it's called hardware cloth. You can go to Lowe's or something. You get a 1/4 inch square, 1/2 inch square, maybe bigger.
Okay, just plain old hardware cloth. Okay.
Well,
I saw some advertised that is stainless steel, and they said it lasts. It's made of.
But you don't want it to last.
Oh, you don't?
No, I thought you want it to decompose after what, 3 or 4 years, maybe? I don't know.
I did see at the Tulare World Ag Show in California, I saw a company selling a stainless steel one for commercial use, and it was very, very, very thin wire, stainless steel wire. Wow. That it was woven from. And my guess is that it was so thin and so small that the tree would push it apart as the roots grew. But I don't think a place would stay in business very long if they sold something that was going to constrict the trees. But how long they'd been selling them, I don't know. I didn't try it out.
If you're doing grow beds though, for planting, I could see that would be very beneficial.
Yes.
Yeah.
You could line the bottom of the bed with that stainless steel, and it's there forever.
Yes, that's correct.
In our orchard, can you hear me, Ken?
Yes, yes.
Our orchard, we just plant moleweed, and it becomes a nuisance in some ways. You just can kill it after a while, and it still keeps growing, but that takes care of the voles and moles naturally.
Moleweed.
Moleweed. It's a lovely plant, but it's a nuisance after a while. What I want to ask Darren is a couple things. I have a good friend that works at a mushroom place, and he told me that the soil is fumigated with some toxic chemicals, so nothing will grow in it except the mushrooms, and they have to let it sit a good while before they can sell it to the public, so it becomes less toxic. Have any recommendations about that?
That I wasn't aware of that. That's quite possibly the case. What I do know is that God's creation is so amazing that even when there are toxic substances in the soil or in compost, there are biological forms that actually are able to deal with that toxicity and mitigate it. So that's probably why people still get good results from mushroom compost.
Okay. And if you feed your earthworms newspaper, don't they use soybean ink for newspaper? Wouldn't that probably be GMO ink?
That would probably be true. And that, that's not necessarily a good thing. What percentage of that is on the paper, I have no idea. It's something I've done in the past and I'm not currently doing. And, I really am not knowledgeable about the detrimental effect of that. We live in an environment where so many things that we eat and that are products that we use that are just saturated with genetically modified products.
Yeah.
That's pretty hard to get away from it.
Yeah, so it might not be a problem. And the other was in planting trees, way they naturally grow in the wild seems to be that the main root, the largest root of the tree, grows to the north. So if we plant a tree, even if we plant the way Mrs. White says, would it also be good to plant that so it faces the direction it grew naturally in the wild? Otherwise, won't that taproot turn and go back north if you faced it the wrong direction?
I'm not knowledgeable about that. What I do know is that roots grow very rapidly. They have the ability to, I liken it to our smell, they can sense where the food is in the soil and they grow towards where that is. Maybe there's a magnetic force from the North Pole that attracts, the root to go that direction. I don't know. I'm not aware of that. Haven't observed it. Not that I've pulled out that many trees to see that, but there's definitely energies in the soil that we're not really familiar with. Some people have almost a form of spiritualism to explain it, but I don't know too much about that.
Well, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Really appreciate this evening's presentation.
Praise God.
And some person mentioned moleweed. Where do we get moleweed seed?
I can give it to you.
Well, I'd love some.
markheisey@gmail.com. I'll mail you seed.
Okay.
Okay, guys, it's kind of getting late on the East Coast. I don't want to keep this forum open longer than we need to, but I don't want to cut anybody off. I might mention that Pastor Greenfield is scheduled to speak on Sabbath at the same venue, May 16th. I hope that hasn't changed. I didn't confirm that with you earlier, but that's a week from this Sabbath. So you'll get a chance to hear him then. It'll, of course, be a little bit more of a spiritual topic, but also related, I'm sure, to agriculture and all the things that God's trying to communicate to us through these ABCs. I just want to say again, I think I speak for everybody. This was a real blessing this evening, Darren, and you've been very generous with your time, and we really appreciate it. We're very much looking forward to having you back on May the 16th. For those who might have an opportunity to join us this coming Sabbath, let me just mention very briefly, I'll probably get another announcement out to everybody on this as well, but May the 9th, that's this coming Sabbath, Elder Dwayne Lemon will be our speaker, and we'll look forward to seeing some of you back then if you don't have other responsibilities or commitments elsewhere. Let's close out with a word of prayer if we could, and we'll put this video up on our website as well as our YouTube channel. So if you want to go back and revisit some of the information that was shared here, you'll be given an opportunity to do that. Go to www.bannerelksda.org. Thanks again for being here. Our special thanks again to Pastor Greenfield. And let's just bow our heads for a moment and close out with a word of prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, it's a privilege and a joy that we could be tenders to your garden that you've placed here on this planet. We know it was intended to be a blessing for us, and it's a blessing, unfortunately, too many of us have missed out on. But it is one that we want to take advantage of. As Pastor Greenfield has so beautifully laid it out this evening, there are so many benefits to our cooperating with you. There's much to learn spiritually, many spiritual lessons. There's many things that we will benefit from as far as our health. We're amazed at how our food source can be for our betterment or our detriment. The devil knows this, and he seems to have taken control of our food source, and unfortunately is polluted the environment that it's grown in, has created all kinds of negative side effects, resulting in many diseases that we suffer from today. So may we hearken the information that we've been given, hearken to this call to be involved in growing our own provisions, recognizing that there are so many blessings to all of us in taking up this work. Just want to pray a special blessing on everyone that attended, on their efforts wherever they are in trying to put what we learned today into practice, and your special blessing on the work at Weimar, and your special blessing specifically on the leadership there, and especially Pastor Greenfield. Now go with us, give us a good night's rest, each of us. Bring us back again this coming Sabbath, if it is your will, that we might worship and pray and study together again. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. God bless you all. It's been a blessing.